I've gone, people have asked me why I waited for the second half of my life to write my first novel. And my answer is, I didn't. I actually wrote my first novel in my 30s while I was living on Vashon Island. So I was here when that first novel happened. I'm going to try standing here. This is sort of bizarre. Let's try this. Yeah, I can't do the sweet thing. Let me just try this. I don't like microphones, so we're going to work on this one. Okay. So anyway, I wrote my first novel when I was living here on Vashon. I finished it when I was 35 years old. And Bill and I, at that point, moved from Vashon Island. He had been teaching at Lakeside School, running the wilderness program for 7 years. We moved to Ketchum, Idaho, and I had begun to look for an agent for my novel when we went on a hiking and scrambling trip in southeastern Utah in the canyon country of the Escalante drainage. Now, we'd always done programs down there with students from Lakeside School, and this is the first time that Bill and I went on our own. And we were following a cross-country route. We were up in the Water Pocket Fold, and in a fluke accident, a piece of the slick rock peeled off, hit me in the face, and knocked me over backwards. I shattered my talus when I fell. I had multiple injuries, and had a long night of surviving while Bill went cross-country to try to get help. A helicopter came in the morning, rescued me, took me to the hospital, and I thought, well, I have a broken ankle, I'm lucky, I'm alive, and life goes on. Well, life didn't quite go on the way I'd planned it. I had 5 surgeries, and it took about 6 years to walk without crutches and a cane. And during that period, I found that I needed all my creative energies to heal my foot. So I put the novel in a closet, and Bill and I started a cross-country ski touring business in Idaho. I also felt, in terms of writing, that it's an isolating profession. You're there alone, and healing, I found, was an isolating process. So I think the choice to be a part of the community and run the cross-country ski touring center was a good one. So for 7 years, I did not write. I made soup and anti-sinfully delicious brownies, and I did ski rentals. And we then sold the business, and we decided to go ride our bicycles for a year in different parts of the world. I could ride a bike at that point without pain. I still had some problems with the walking and was using a cane. So we took a year, and we did a tip-to-tip year. We first biked from the south to the north tip of Japan on the back roads. We then went up to the north tip of Norway and biked down across Scandinavia and Europe to the Rock of Gibraltar. And then we biked to the north tip of New Zealand and down to the south tip and back. And that was our year of biking. And something in that year of just being out there riding every day must have keyed the creativity in my mind, and within a month of coming back to Seattle, I started writing. And I assumed it would take 2 to 3 years, as long as it had taken me to write my first novel. And I started writing, and then my aunt and parents, who were in their 80s and 90s, were beginning to have health difficulties. So my sister and I started commuting to Wisconsin to help caregive them. Then we would fly back, or we'd trade off and come back to Idaho, where I'd start working on my book somewhat obsessively, I have to admit. Then I'd go back and take care of the parents, and then come back and I'd write some more in the book. And at one point I looked over, and there was this man standing in the corner who looked very much alone, and it was Bill, my husband. And I realized that between caregiving parents and trying to write a novel, that I wasn't doing much with Bill. So I thought we needed to do something to jazz up this marriage again and do one of the things that we'd always loved to do together, which is to go hiking and adventuring. So I added that into the mix as well. So then now we had the commutes to Wisconsin, we had the adventures now and then to keep the marriage alive and growing, and we had my attempts to write this novel. In short, it took 10 years to write it, not 3 years, because I would return from these adventures or when my father died, and all these new things had been happening in my life. And here was this novel that I'd stopped writing, say, 6 months earlier, and I'd grown beyond that. So I'd come back, I'd take it apart, I'd rewrite, I'd layer in all the things that were going on in my life. So actually, for a 300-page book, it's a very densely layered book because it has so much of what was happening in my life, in my 50s, in the book. So at the end of 10 years, there I am, I have my novel written, and I put it out to a few agents, and immediately it got snapped up by CineLit, and they're a team, and one is a film agent and one is a literary agent, and they just loved the novel. They were talking about movie rights, they were talking about a French producer. I thought, I'm hot. No, I mean, my gosh, a movie. They're going to make a movie of my book. And I was just, oh, 10 years, what's 10 years for this? Well, then they started to try to sell my book, and literary fiction went flat. For 2 years, it was vampires. And people suggested, you know, Annie, could you fit a vampire in your book? I said, no. So, during these 2 years, I'm getting many rejections are coming in, and some of them, you know, most of them say lovely things about the book, but it's basically, it doesn't fit into our list, and each one is just like a dagger to the heart. So you go through this, and in the midst of this time, my mom died, and 9 months later, our house in Ketchum, Idaho burned to the ground. In the house was the manuscript of my first novel. So it went up in ash with everything else in the house. After this happened, I said to myself, you know, Annie, maybe you don't have to get a book published. You know, maybe there are other things going on in your life. It just puts so much in perspective, and I thought, it's time to release this book. It's time to release it all and go on with your life. So I worked on it for a bit, and I did. I went on with my life. A year ago this August, the Castle Rock fire was burning outside of Ketchum, Idaho. And it was coming closer and closer to the town. About 2,000 or 3,000 people had been evacuated from the town. We were living in a little house at the foot of the mountain, the ski mountain, Bald Mountain at the time. And one day the flames came up the backside of Bald Mountain, and it was like a volcano had exploded. The flames were shooting up the top of Baldy. Bill and I had walked across the valley and climbed up. We were watching this fire. It was just extraordinary, and we didn't know if it was going to come down and take out the town or not. Eventually, the helicopters and the planes stopped the fire. We walked back to our little house where we had our car and our truck packed with all our belongings, and since our house had burned down, they all fit in the car and the truck. We were just fortunate. We were ready to go. It was so smoky, you couldn't breathe. The ashes were raining down. We were just walking out of the house, and the telephone rang. And I said, okay, Bill, I'll be out in a second, but I'll just answer the phone. So I answer the phone. It's my agent. She says, Annie, Ellen Edwards, executive editor of National American Library at Penguin, has just read your book, and she is going to make you an offer tomorrow. So we drove out for the night, and we came back into the smoke the next morning and the ash, and indeed Penguin called the next morning and they had made an offer on my book. So that's the story. It was 26 years, one could say, that it took for me to get my first novel published. I was not in the second half of my life when I began the process. I am now, but here I am tonight, and it's wonderful to have the good fortune to have Madame Olivetti published.